The sun was setting over the rugged Arizona territory in 1877, painting the sky in shades of orange and deep purple. Thomas McCarthy, a simple cattle herdsman from Texas, had been trailing his small herd through the canyon lands for 3 days now. The 42-year-old man with weathered skin and tired eyes never imagined that his life would change forever on this particular evening. Thomas had always been a peaceful man. He inherited his father's small ranch after the Civil War and spent his days tending to cattle, fixing fences, and living a quiet life. He wasn't wealthy, but he had enough to get by. His wife had passed away from fever 2 years earlier, leaving him alone with his thoughts and his animals. The cattle were his only companions now, and he knew each one by the distinctive markings on their hides. The territory where Thomas found himself was known to be Apache land. Everyone knew the stories about the fierce warriors who protected their homeland with unwavering determination. Thomas had always respected the Apache people from a distance. He understood they were fighting to preserve their way of life, just as he was trying to preserve his own simple existence. He had no quarrel with them and hoped they had none with him. As darkness began to creep across the landscape, Thomas decided to make camp near a cluster of large rocks that would provide some shelter from the wind. He gathered dry brush for a fire and let his cattle graze nearby. The animals were restless, which made him nervous. Cattle had instincts that humans sometimes lacked, and when they sensed danger, a smart man paid attention. Thomas pulled out his old rifle, a weapon he rarely used except to scare off coyotes or the occasional mountain lion. He checked to make sure it was loaded, more out of habit than any real expectation of trouble. The rifle had belonged to his father, who had carried it through the war between the states. It was heavy and reliable, though Thomas had never been much of a marksman. Just as he was about to start the fire, he heard a sound that made his blood run cold. It was the unmistakable noise of movement through the brush, careful and deliberate. Thomas froze, his hand instinctively reaching for the rifle beside him. His heart pounded in his chest as he strained his eyes to see through the gathering darkness. A figure emerged from the shadows, moving silently between the rocks. Thomas could barely make out the shape in the dim light. His mind raced with fear and adrenaline. Years of hearing stories about attacks and raids flooded his memory. Without thinking, acting purely on instinct and terror, Thomas raised his rifle. The shot rang out across the canyon, echoing off the rock walls like thunder. The figure fell immediately, and Thomas felt his stomach drop. The sound of the gunshot seemed to hang in the air forever, a terrible punctuation mark on a moment that could never be taken back. For several seconds, Thomas couldn't move. He stood there, rifle still raised, trying to comprehend what he had just done. Then slowly he lowered the weapon and took a hesitant step forward. His hands were shaking as he pulled a match from his pocket and lit it, needing to see what he had done. The flickering light revealed a sight that would haunt Thomas for the rest of his life. Lying on the ground was not a warrior coming to attack him, but a young Apache boy, no more than 16 or 17 years old. The boy's eyes were wide with pain and shock, and blood was spreading across his chest from where the bullet had struck him. Thomas dropped to his knees beside the boy, his mind reeling with horror at what he had done. This was no raiding party, no threat to his life or property. This was just a young person, probably curious about the stranger camping in his people's territory, or perhaps just passing through on some errand of his own. The boy tried to speak, but only a weak gasp came out. His breathing was labored and shallow. Thomas could see that the wound was serious, possibly fatal. He had spent enough time on the frontier to recognize when someone was badly hurt. Oh God, Thomas muttered, pressing his hands against the wound to try to stop the bleeding. I'm sorry, son. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. I didn't see. I was scared. The boy's eyes met his, and Thomas saw no hatred there, only confusion and pain. That look cut deeper than any knife could have. This young man was someone's son, perhaps someone's brother. He had a family who would be waiting for him to return home, not knowing that a frightened herdsman had mistaken him for a threat in the darkness. Thomas knew he had to act quickly. The boy needed help that he couldn't provide alone. But he also knew that he was deep in Apache territory, and if the boy's people found him here with their wounded kinsman, they would have every right to seek immediate justice. His own life would likely be forfeit, and he wouldn't blame them for it. Yet as he looked down at the young face, now pale and growing weaker by the moment, Thomas made a decision that went against every survival instinct he possessed. He couldn't just leave the boy here to die alone. He couldn't run away and pretend this hadn't happened. Whatever the consequences might be, he had to try to save this young life that he had so carelessly endangered. Thomas carefully lifted the boy, surprised at how light he was. He carried him to his bedroll and laid him down gently. Then he tore strips from his own shirt to make bandages, working frantically to stop the bleeding. The boy drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally making small sounds of pain that tore at Thomas's heart. As Thomas worked through the night, trying to keep the boy alive, he knew that dawn would bring a reckoning. The Apache would come looking for their missing young man, and when they found him in the camp of a white settler, with a bullet wound in his chest, there would be hell to pay. But Thomas had made his choice. He would face whatever came, and he would do everything in his power to keep this boy breathing until help arrived. The first rays of sunlight crept over the canyon walls, bringing with them the harsh reality of what Thomas had done. The young Apache boy lay on the bedroll, his breathing shallow but steady. Throughout the long night, Thomas had changed the bandages 3 times, each time praying that the bleeding would stop. His own exhaustion was complete, but he didn't dare sleep. Thomas had managed to get some water into the boy's mouth during the night. The wound was serious, but the bullet had passed through cleanly, missing any vital organs by what seemed like a miracle. Still, infection was a constant danger out here, and the boy had lost a lot of blood. He needed proper medicine and care, things Thomas couldn't provide with his limited supplies. As the morning light grew stronger, Thomas heard what he had been dreading all night. The sound of horses approaching, multiple riders moving with purpose through the canyon. His mouth went dry and his heart began to race again. This was it. The moment of judgment had arrived. Thomas stood up slowly, making sure his rifle was far from reach. He raised his hand slightly, wanting to show that he meant no harm. 6 Apache warriors emerged from between the rocks, their faces hard and unreadable. They were armed with rifles and bows, and their eyes immediately found the wounded boy lying in Thomas's camp. The lead warrior, a man who appeared to be in his 30s with sharp features and piercing eyes, dismounted quickly. His hand moved to the knife at his belt, and Thomas could see the rage building in his expression. The warrior moved toward him with deadly intent, and Thomas knew he had only seconds to speak. "Wait," Thomas said, keeping his voice steady despite his fear. "Please, just look at him first. Look at the boy." The warrior paused, his eyes darting between Thomas and the wounded youth. 2 other warriors had already rushed to the boy's side, kneeling down to examine him. They spoke rapidly in their own language, their voices urgent and concerned. "I shot him," Thomas said plainly, knowing that lies would only make things worse. "Last night in the dark. I was scared. I didn't see that he was just a boy. I thought someone was attacking my camp." The lead warrior's jaw clenched and his knuckles turned white as he gripped his knife handle. Thomas could see the internal struggle playing out on the man's face. Every instinct probably told him to take revenge right here and now. "I know you have every right to kill me," Thomas continued, his voice cracking slightly. "What I did was terrible, but I've been trying to save him all night. I bandaged his wounds. I gave him water. The bullet went clean through. He needs medicine. Needs someone who knows healing better than me, but I've done everything I could." One of the warriors examining the boy looked up and spoke to the leader in Apache. Thomas couldn't understand the words, but he could see the surprise in their faces as they inspected the bandages and saw how carefully the boy had been tended. The lead warrior stepped closer to Thomas, so close that Thomas could see the pain and anger warring in his eyes. "You shot my brother's son," he said in clear but accented English. "You shot a boy who carries no weapon." Thomas felt his throat tighten with guilt. "I know, God help me, I know. I would take it back if I could. I would take that bullet myself if it would undo what I've done." "Why do you not run?" the warrior asked, his eyes searching Thomas's face. "You had the whole night to escape. We would never find you." "Because I couldn't leave him to die alone," Thomas answered honestly. "What I did was wrong. Running away wouldn't change that. I had to try to save him, or at least stay with him so he wouldn't be alone if he died. It's the least I could do after what I took from him." The warrior stared at him for a long moment, and Thomas met his gaze without flinching. If this was where his life ended, he would face it with whatever dignity he had left. Finally, the warrior spoke again. "My name is Delche. That boy is called Naiche, son of my younger brother. You are right that we could kill you now. Many would say we should, Thomas nodded slowly. I wouldn't blame you if you did. Delche turned to look at his nephew, watching as the other warriors carefully prepared to move him. But you stayed. You tried to save him when you could have saved yourself. This is not the action of an enemy. This is something else. One of the other warriors spoke urgently to Delche, clearly arguing for something. The discussion grew heated, with several men gesturing toward Thomas and then toward the wounded boy. Thomas stood silently, understanding that his fate was being decided but unable to influence the outcome. Finally, Delche raised his hand, and the others fell silent. He walked over to where Nietzsche lay and knelt beside him, placing a hand gently on the boy's forehead. The young man's eyes fluttered open briefly, and he seemed to recognize his uncle. Delche spoke softly to him in Apache, and though Thomas couldn't understand the words, he could hear the love and concern in the man's voice. After a moment, Delche stood and returned to Thomas. Nietzsche lives because of your care. The wound is bad, but you kept him alive through the night. Our medicine man will heal him fully. Thomas felt a wave of relief wash over him, though he knew his own situation was still precarious. I'm glad. Truly I am. You will come with us, Delche announced, and Thomas's brief relief evaporated. The other warriors moved toward him, and though they didn't bind his hands, their presence made it clear this wasn't a request. Where are you taking me? Thomas asked, trying to keep the fear from his voice. To our camp, Delche replied. The council must decide what to do with a white man who shoots our children even by mistake. But you will not be harmed until they make their judgment. You have my word on this. Thomas nodded, accepting his fate. Two warriors carefully lifted Nietzsche, preparing to transport him back to their camp. Thomas's cattle were left behind, forgotten in the wake of more important matters. He walked between the mounted warriors, Delche riding ahead, leading the group deeper into Apache territory. As they traveled through the winding canyons and across open desert, Thomas couldn't help but wonder what awaited him. Would the council show mercy? Or would they decide that justice required his life for the harm he had caused? He had acted in fear, but that didn't change the fact that he had shot an unarmed boy. Whatever happened, he had made his choice to stay and help. Now he would have to live or die with the consequences. The Apache camp appeared in the distance as they crested a rocky ridge, nestled in a protected valley with a stream running through it. Thomas counted at least 30 wickiups, the traditional dome-shaped dwellings made of wooden frames covered with brush and hide. Smoke rose from several cooking fires, and he could see women working while children played nearby. It looked peaceful, like any other community going about its daily life. As their group entered the camp, people stopped what they were doing and stared. The sight of a white man walking among the warriors caused immediate tension. Voices rose in alarm and anger as people recognized Nietzsche being carried, unconscious and wounded. A woman's cry pierced the air, raw with anguish, and Thomas saw her running toward them. She must be Nietzsche's mother. The woman reached her son and dropped to her knees beside the warriors carrying him. Her hands trembled as she touched his face, speaking rapidly in Apache. When she looked up and saw Thomas, her expression transformed from grief to fury. She launched herself at him, and Thomas stood perfectly still, accepting her fists beating against his chest as she screamed at him. Delche stepped between them, gently but firmly pulling the woman away. He spoke to her in their language, his tone both sympathetic and commanding. The woman collapsed against him, sobbing, as others came to help carry Nietzsche to one of the wickiups. An elderly man with gray hair and a weathered face carrying a medicine bundle followed them inside. Thomas stood in the center of the camp, surrounded by hostile stares. Children peeked from behind their mother's skirts while the men evaluated him with hard eyes. He felt the weight of their judgment and understood it completely. To them, he was just another white settler bringing death and destruction to their people. Delche returned and gestured for Thomas to follow. They walked to the far side of the camp, where a larger wickiup stood apart from the others. Two warriors positioned themselves outside, making it clear that Thomas was now a prisoner. Inside, it was dim and cool, with a small fire pit in the center. Delche indicated that Thomas should sit. You will stay here, Delche said. The council will gather at sunset to hear what happened and decide your fate. Until then, you will not be harmed, but do not try to leave. My warriors will not be as patient as I have been. Thomas nodded. I understand. Thank you for not killing me immediately. I know that would have been easier. Delche studied him for a moment. You are not what I expected from a white settler. Most would have run or fought. You did neither. You stayed and helped. This confuses many of my people. They want to hate you, but your actions do not allow for simple hatred. I'm just a simple herdsman, Thomas said quietly. I've never wanted to hurt anyone. I've lived my whole life trying to be a good man, and in one moment of fear I nearly killed a boy. I'll carry that guilt for the rest of my life, however long that may be. Delche was silent for a moment before speaking again. The medicine man says Nietzsche will live. The wound is clean and you stopped much of the bleeding, but he will be weak for many days, perhaps weeks. He may never have full strength in his shoulder again. Thomas felt tears sting his eyes. I'm so sorry. If there was any way to undo it, I would. Words are easy, Delche replied, though his tone was not unkind. The council will judge you by your actions, not your words. He turned to leave, then paused at the entrance. My people have lost much to white settlers. Land, family, our way of life. You should know this before the council meets. Their patience is worn thin. After Delche left, Thomas sat alone with his thoughts. Through the hide walls of the wickiup, he could hear the sounds of the camp. Children laughing, women talking as they worked, the occasional whinny of a horse. Normal sounds of life continuing despite the crisis his presence had created. He thought about his own life. The ranch he would probably never see again. The cattle he had abandoned. But mostly he thought about the look in Nietzsche's eyes when the boy realized he had been shot. That moment would stay with Thomas forever. As the hours passed, Thomas could hear discussions happening outside. Voices were raised in what were clearly arguments. He recognized Delche's voice, calm and measured, occasionally rising above the others. Thomas wondered if the warrior was defending him or simply explaining what had happened. The sun moved across the sky, visible through the smoke hole at the top of the wickiup. Thomas had not eaten since the previous day, and his guards brought him no food or water. He didn't complain. He was lucky to still be breathing. Finally, as the sun began to set and shadows grew long across the camp, Delche returned with 4 other warriors. Their faces were serious and unreadable. The council is ready, Delche announced. You will come now and speak truth about what happened. The elders have agreed to hear you before making their decision. This is more than many wanted to give you. Thomas stood, his legs stiff from sitting so long. He followed the warriors to the center of the camp where a fire had been built. Around it sat 7 older men, leaders of the community by their bearing and the respect others showed them. Behind them stood many of the tribe's adults, forming a circle. Thomas felt dozens of eyes upon him, most filled with anger and suspicion. Delche led Thomas to stand before the council. One of the elders, a man with a deeply lined face and intelligent eyes, spoke in Apache. Delche translated. Elder Cochise asks why you have come to Apache land with your cattle and your weapons. Thomas took a breath and answered honestly. I was moving my herd to winter pasture. I did not know I was crossing into your territory. I meant no disrespect and had no intention of settling on your land. I was only passing through, Delche translated, and the elder nodded slowly. Another elder spoke, this one with scars across his chest that spoke of old battles. Elder Geronimo says that white men always claim they are only passing through, but they never leave. They come with cattle, then with wagons, then with soldiers. Why should we believe you are different? Thomas met the elder's eyes. I cannot speak for other white men. I can only speak for myself. I am one man with a small herd. I have no wagon, no family following behind. I was alone and will leave alone if you permit it. The elders conferred among themselves, their voices low. Thomas waited, his heart pounding. Finally, the first elder, Cochise, spoke again. Tell us exactly what happened when you shot the boy. Leave nothing out. Thomas did as he was asked, describing everything from the moment he made camp to when he heard movement in the darkness. He explained his fear, his terrible mistake, and his immediate regret. He told them how he had spent the night trying to save Nietzsche's life, knowing that dawn would bring judgment. When he finished, silence fell over the gathering. The weight of his words hung in the air like smoke from the fire. The council elders spoke among themselves in low voices while Thomas stood before them, waiting for judgment. The fire crackled and sent sparks floating up into the darkening sky. He could feel the hostility radiating from many in the crowd, particularly from the women who had lost children and husbands to white violence over the years. A younger warrior stepped forward, his face twisted with anger. Delche translated his words. Taze says it does not matter if you meant to shoot Nietzsche or not. You still pulled the trigger. You still brought violence to our land. He says the penalty should be death, as it would be if one of us shot a white boy. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Thomas understood their anger. He had seen the same rage in his own community when Apache raids had struck settlers. Violence bred violence, and the cycle seemed endless. Another voice spoke up, this time an older woman who stepped into the firelight. Her words were sharp and bitter, and Thomas saw tears streaming down her weathered cheeks as she spoke. Delshay's voice was somber as he translated. She is Nietzsche's grandmother. She says she has already lost 2 sons to white soldiers. She says white men take and take from Apache people but never give anything back. She asks why we should show mercy when none has been shown to us. Thomas listened, his heart heavy with the weight of history that he, as an individual, had not created, but was now forced to answer for. When she finished speaking, he asked Delshay if he could respond. The elder Cochise nodded, granting permission. Thomas spoke slowly, choosing his words carefully. I cannot undo the wrongs that other white men have done to your people. I cannot bring back your sons or restore the land that has been taken from you. I know my words seem hollow in the face of so much loss, but I can tell you this. I stayed with your grandson through the night when I could have run. I used my own shirt to bandage his wounds. I held him when he cried out in pain. I did these things not because I am a good man, but because I am a guilty one who wanted to make right what I could. He paused, then continued. You are right that white men have taken much from you. But what will you gain by taking my life? Will it heal Nietzsche faster? Will it bring back those you have lost? Or will it simply add another death to the long list of deaths between our peoples? The grandmother stared at him with eyes that had seen too much pain. For a moment, Thomas thought she might spit at him. But instead, she simply turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness beyond the firelight. The elders conferred again, their discussion growing heated. Thomas could see that they were divided. Some seemed to favor mercy, while others clearly wanted justice in the form of his death. Delshay stood to the side, his face unreadable, offering no indication of which side he supported. Finally, the scarred elder called Geronimo stood up. The crowd fell silent, showing great respect for whatever he was about to say. He spoke at length, his voice carrying authority and wisdom. When he finished, he sat down again and all eyes turned to Thomas. Delshay stepped forward to translate. Elder Geronimo has spoken of the old ways, when disputes between peoples were sometimes settled by having the guilty party serve the injured family. He proposes that instead of death, you should stay with us and work for Nietzsche's family until the boy is fully healed. You would help them with their daily tasks. Provide for them as their son cannot while he recovers. Only when Nietzsche can ride and hunt again would you be free to leave. Thomas felt a surge of hope mixed with uncertainty. Living among the Apache, whose language he did not speak and whose ways he did not know, would be challenging. But it was far better than death, and it might give him a chance to truly make amends for what he had done. I would be honored to serve the family, Thomas said. I will work hard and do whatever is needed. But not everyone agreed with Geronimo's proposal. Several warriors voiced strong objections, and Thomas caught enough of the tone to understand they thought this was too lenient. The debate continued, with various members of the tribe speaking for and against the idea. Then, from the wickiup where Nietzsche was being tended, a weak voice called out. Everyone turned to see the young man being helped to the entrance by the medicine man. Nietzsche was pale and unsteady but conscious. He spoke in Apache, his words halting and soft. Delshay translated with surprise in his voice. Nietzsche says he remembers waking in the night and seeing the white man caring for him. He says he felt no hatred from this man, only sorrow and fear. He says if the man is willing to stay and help his family, he would accept this as payment for his injury. The crowd's mood shifted perceptibly. For the injured party himself to speak in favor of mercy carried enormous weight. Nietzsche's mother emerged from the wickiup and stood beside her son, supporting him. She looked at Thomas with an expression that was no longer purely hateful, though neither was it friendly. It was complicated, mixing grief and anger with perhaps a grudging recognition of his remorse. The elders gathered once more, and this time their discussion was brief. Elder Cochise stood and made the final pronouncement. Delshay translated with careful precision. The council has decided. You will stay with Nietzsche's family and work for them until the next full moon, after he is declared fully healed by our medicine man. You will hunt for them, gather wood, repair their wickiup, and do whatever tasks the family requires. You will learn our ways and respect our customs. If you try to escape or cause any further harm, You will be killed immediately. If you fulfill this obligation with honor, you will be free to leave and no Apache will pursue you. Do you accept these terms? Thomas felt tears of relief prick his eyes. It was more mercy than he had dared hope for. Yes, I accept. Thank you. I will serve the family faithfully and with respect. Cochise nodded. Then it is decided. Delche will be responsible for you. He will teach you what you need to know and ensure you keep your word. The crowd began to disperse, some clearly satisfied with the decision, others grumbling their disapproval. Thomas noticed that Nietzsche's mother watched him for a long moment before helping her son back into the wickiup. In her eyes he saw a complicated mixture of emotions, none of them simple. Delche approached him. You have been given a rare gift. Do not waste it. Do not shame yourself or those who spoke for mercy. I won't, Thomas promised. I'll work harder than I've ever worked in my life. You will need to, Delche replied. Nietzsche's father was a skilled hunter before he was killed by soldiers 2 years ago. His mother and grandmother struggled to provide everything the family needs. You will have to fill the role of provider while the boy heals. It will not be easy. Thomas nodded, understanding the magnitude of the task before him. But as he looked around the camp at these people who had every reason to hate him, but had chosen instead to give him a chance at redemption, he felt something he hadn't expected. He felt grateful not just to be alive, but to have the opportunity to make things right. The first rays of dawn found Thomas already awake, lying on a blanket outside Nietzsche's family wickiup. Delche had explained that he was not yet trusted enough to sleep inside with the family, but he was expected to be nearby in case they needed anything during the night. The hard ground and cold air had made for an uncomfortable rest, but Thomas didn't complain. He was alive, and that was more than he deserved. Nietzsche's mother, whose name Thomas learned was Desba, emerged from the wickiup as the sun rose. She looked at him with wary eyes, neither hostile nor welcoming, and gestured for him to follow. Without a word, she led him to where water containers were kept and indicated he should fill them from the stream. It was his first task, and he set about it immediately. The stream was a short walk from the camp, and as Thomas knelt to fill the containers, he noticed several women watching him from a distance. They whispered among themselves, and he caught hostile glances. He understood their suspicion. A white man in their camp was an anomaly, and one who had shot one of their young men was worse than unwelcome. When he returned with the water, Desba had started a fire for cooking. She pointed to an axe and then to a pile of wood that needed splitting. Thomas picked up the tool and began his work. The physical labor felt good after the stress of the past 2 days. Each swing of the axe was a small act of penance, a way to channel his guilt into something useful. Throughout the morning, other tasks followed. He helped repair a tear in the wickiup's covering, gathered more firewood, and assisted in preparing skins for tanning. Nietzsche's grandmother, who was called Nasha, watched him work with sharp eyes, occasionally correcting him with gestures when he did something wrong. She never smiled, never spoke a kind word, but she was teaching him nonetheless. Delche appeared around midday with a bow and several arrows. You said you were a herdsman, not a hunter, he said. But Nietzsche's family needs meat. I will teach you to hunt the Apache way. They went into the hills surrounding the camp, and Delche showed him how to track deer, how to move silently through the brush, how to read the signs of the desert. Thomas had hunted before, but always with his rifle. The bow was different, requiring patience and skill he didn't possess yet. His first attempts were embarrassing. Arrows sailed wide of their targets or fell short. But Delche was a patient teacher, adjusting Thomas's stance, showing him how to breathe, how to become part of the landscape rather than an intruder in it. Why are you helping me? Thomas asked during a rest. You could let me fail and give the council reason to reconsider their mercy. Delche was quiet for a moment, looking out over the desert landscape. Because you stayed with Nietzsche when you could have run. Because when you speak, I hear genuine regret, not the empty words white men often use to avoid consequences. And because if you fail, Nietzsche's family suffers more. I will not let them starve because of pride or revenge. Days turned into weeks. Thomas's hands, already calloused from ranch work, developed new calluses from different types of labor. He learned to weave baskets from desert plants, to track animals by the faintest signs, to understand the Apache language through immersion and necessity. Desba began to teach him words, pointing at objects and saying their names. The lessons were brief and without warmth, but they were lessons nonetheless. Nietzsche recovered slowly. The medicine man, whose name was Chado, changed his bandages daily and applied herbs that Thomas didn't recognize. The boy would sit outside the wickiup on good days, watching Thomas work. At first his expression was neutral, neither friendly nor angry. But gradually, Thomas noticed something shifting. One afternoon, as Thomas struggled to repair a water container, Nietzsche spoke to him in halting English. "No, like this." The boy demonstrated the proper technique with his good arm, and Thomas followed his instruction. It was the first time Nietzsche had directly helped him, and Thomas felt a small spark of hope. "Thank you," Thomas said. "I'm still learning," Nietzsche nodded slowly. "You learn our ways. This is good. Many white men think only their ways are right." It was the beginning of a cautious connection. Nietzsche began to teach Thomas small things about Apache culture and language. In return, Thomas told him about life as a herdsman, about the cattle and the land he had left behind. Their conversations were simple at first, limited by language barriers and lingering tension, but they grew more comfortable with time. The other members of the tribe slowly began to accept Thomas's presence, if not embrace it. Children, who had initially hidden from him, now watched him with open curiosity. Some of the men nodded to him when he passed, acknowledging his hard work if nothing else. The women remained more skeptical, but even they seemed to soften slightly when they saw how diligently he served Nietzsche's family. One evening, after a successful hunt where Thomas finally brought down a young deer, Desba did something unexpected. She prepared a portion of the meat and handed it to him directly, meeting his eyes as she did so. It was the first time she had treated him as anything other than an obligation. "Thank you," she said in careful English, words that Nietzsche must have taught her for this moment. "You work hard for family." Thomas felt emotion well up in his chest. "It's the least I can do. I wish I could do more." She studied his face for a long moment, then nodded slowly before returning to her cooking. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was acknowledgement. It was the recognition that he was trying, that his efforts were genuine. Nasha, the grandmother, remained the hardest to reach. She rarely looked at him directly and never spoke to him at all, but Thomas noticed small things. When he came back from gathering wood in the rain, she had moved his blanket under cover. When he was sick with fever for 2 days, she left medicine near his sleeping place. She never acknowledged these acts of basic kindness, but they happened nonetheless. As autumn deepened and the air grew cooler, Thomas found himself changing in ways he hadn't expected. He no longer thought of the Apache as dangerous savages, the way so many settlers did. He saw them as people, individuals with personalities, fears, and dreams. He watched fathers play with their children, couples argue and make up, elders tell stories around the fire. They were human in all the ways he was human. One night, Delche invited Thomas to sit with him and some other men around their fire. They were talking about hunting strategies, and to Thomas's surprise, they included him in the conversation, asking his opinion about tracking a particular animal. He shared what he knew, and they listened respectfully, even adding on to his ideas with their own knowledge. Later, as the others dispersed, Delche remained. "You have done well," he said. "Better than I expected when we first brought you here." "I had good motivation," Thomas replied. "And good teachers. Nietzsche grows stronger every day. The medicine man says he will be fully healed within the month. Then you will be free to leave." Thomas nodded, but to his surprise, the thought of leaving brought mixed emotions. "I'll be glad to know he's healed. That's all I wanted from the beginning." "What will you do? Return to your ranch?" Delche asked. "I suppose so," Thomas said, though even to his own ears he sounded uncertain. "It's all I've ever known." Delche looked at him thoughtfully. "You have learned much here. You are not the same man who stumbled into our territory in fear and ignorance. What you do with that knowledge is up to you." The word stayed with Thomas long after Delche had gone to sleep. He lay under the stars, thinking about the life he had left behind and the life he had inadvertently discovered here. He thought about the ranch, empty and waiting, and about the family he had come to serve, who had taught him more about honor and forgiveness than he had ever known. The truth was complicated. He missed his old life, the simplicity of it, the solitude that had once brought him peace, but he had also discovered something here among the Apache. He had found purpose in serving others, in making amends, in building bridges between worlds that had been at war for so long. As sleep finally claimed him, Thomas realized that leaving would be harder than he had imagined. Not because he was afraid to go, but because part of him had found a place here, in this community that had every reason to reject him, but had instead given him a chance to become better than he was. The morning came when Chato, the medicine man, examined Nietzsche and declared him fully healed. The young man's shoulder had regained most of its strength, and he could draw a bow without pain. He had been practicing for weeks, determined to prove he was ready to hunt again. When he successfully brought down an antelope on his first hunt after recovery, the entire camp celebrated. Thomas watched the celebration with mixed feelings. He was genuinely happy for Nietzsche, proud even, as if the boy's recovery was somehow his own accomplishment. In a way, it was. He had kept him alive that first terrible night, and then worked for months to support his family while he healed. But Nietzsche's recovery also meant Thomas's obligation was fulfilled. The next full moon would mark the end of his required service. That evening, Delche approached him with news. The council will meet tomorrow to formally release you from your obligation. You are free to gather your things and prepare to leave. Thomas nodded, the weight of the moment settling on him. I understand. Thank you for everything you've taught me. There is something else, Delche continued. Nietzsche's family wishes to speak with you tonight. They have requested a private meeting. Anxiety and curiosity warred within Thomas as he made his way to their wiki-up that evening. He found Desba, Nasha, and Nietzsche waiting for him, sitting around their fire. The atmosphere was formal, important. Thomas sat where Desba indicated, waiting for them to speak. Nietzsche began, his English much improved from months of practice with Thomas. We have discussed what happens tomorrow. My mother and grandmother have something to say to you. Desba spoke first, her words coming slowly but clearly. When you came to us, I hated you. I wanted you dead for what you did to my son. Every day I looked at you and saw the man who shot my child. Thomas nodded, accepting her words. He had always known she felt this way. But I also watched you, she continued. I watched you work until your hands bled. I watched you go hungry so we could eat. I watched you learn our ways with respect, not mockery. I watched you become part of our family even though you were enemy. She paused, seeming to gather her thoughts. You gave me back my son's life twice. Once when you kept him alive that night. And again when you worked so hard that we could survive while he healed. This is debt I cannot repay. Thomas felt his throat tighten. You don't owe me anything. I was trying to repay my own debt. Nasha spoke for the first time in all the months Thomas had been there. Her voice cracked with age, but strong with conviction. Nietzsche translated her words. She says you came to us as an enemy, but became family through your actions. She says the white men took her sons, but you helped raise her grandson back to health. She says this is balance, the kind the spirits understand. The old woman reached into a bundle beside her and pulled out something wrapped in soft leather. She unfolded it carefully to reveal a beautiful knife with a carved bone handle. She held it out to Thomas. This belonged to my father, Nietzsche translated as his grandmother spoke. She wants you to have it. She says it should go to someone who understands honor and redemption. Thomas's hand shook as he accepted the gift. He knew what it meant for her to give him something that belonged to her dead son's grandfather. I don't know what to say. This is too much. Take it, Nietzsche said firmly. My grandmother does not give gifts lightly. To refuse would dishonor her. Thomas looked at the three faces around the fire, seeing acceptance where there had once been only hatred. Thank you, all of you. These months with your family have changed me. I'm not the same man who stumbled into your camp that night. Desba spoke again. Tomorrow council will tell you that you are free to leave. But we want you to know something else. You are welcome to stay if you wish. Not as servant, but as family. As uncle to Nietzsche, as son to his grandmother. The choice is yours. The offer stunned Thomas into silence. He looked at each of them, seeing the sincerity in their expressions. Nietzsche smiled at him, the same boy he had nearly killed now offering him a place in their family. Nasha nodded slowly, her eyes conveying more than words could. Desba watched him with a mixture of hope and understanding, knowing the choice was difficult. I need time to think, Thomas finally managed to say. This is not what I expected. We understand, Nietzsche said. Think tonight. Decide tomorrow. Whatever you choose, you leave here as friend, not enemy. That night Thomas couldn't sleep. He walked to the edge of camp and looked out over the desert, lit silver by the moon. His old life seemed very far away now. The ranch, the cattle, the solitary existence he had known for so long. It had seemed enough once, but that was before he understood what it meant to be part of a community. To work for something larger than himself. He thought about his late wife, wondered what she would have said about all this. She had always been the brave one, the one willing to take risks and embrace change. He could almost hear her voice telling him to follow his heart, to choose the path that would make him grow rather than the one that was simply familiar. As dawn approached, Thomas made his decision. When the council gathered the next morning, Thomas stood before them once again. Elder Cochise spoke first, announcing that Thomas had fulfilled his obligation honorably and was free to leave with the tribe's blessing. No Apache would harm him or pursue him. Thomas thanked them for their mercy and for everything he had learned. Then he took a deep breath and spoke the words that would change his life forever. I am grateful for my freedom, but I have a request. Taiche's family has invited me to stay with them. Not as a servant, but as a member of their family. With the council's permission, I would like to accept their offer. Surprised murmurs rippled through the gathered crowd. This was unprecedented. A white man choosing to stay with the Apache, not as a captive, but as a willing member of the tribe. The elders conferred among themselves. Finally, Elder Geronimo stood and spoke. Delche translated with what Thomas thought might be a hint of a smile. The council recognizes that you have proven yourself through your actions. If Nietzsche's family wishes to adopt you, and if you truly wish to stay and live by our laws and customs, the council grants permission. But understand this, if you choose to stay, you are choosing our way of life completely. You will stand with us in times of trouble. You will follow our laws. You will be Apache. Thomas nodded firmly. I understand and I accept. The decision was made. Thomas McCarthy, the Texas herdsman who had accidentally shot an Apache boy, became Thomas McCarthy, adopted uncle of Nietzsche and member of the Apache tribe. His old life was left behind, not with regret, but with understanding that sometimes the worst mistakes can lead to the most unexpected blessings. Years later, Thomas would often tell the story of that fateful night when fear and darkness led him to shoot an innocent boy. But he would always end the story the same way, by explaining how that terrible moment led him to find a family he never knew he needed, and taught him that redemption was not just about seeking forgiveness, but about choosing to become someone worthy of it. Nietzsche grew into a strong warrior and hunter. His shoulder healed completely despite Delche's early concerns. He and Thomas hunted together often, and the bond between them was as strong as any blood relation. Desba came to love Thomas as a brother, and Nasha, until her death many years later, treated him with the affection she had once reserved only for her own sons. The ranch in Texas was eventually claimed by others, the cattle scattered or sold. Thomas never returned to that life. He had found something more valuable than land or livestock. He had found belonging, purpose, and the peace that comes from turning a moment of terrible violence into a lifetime of understanding and connection. Sometimes tribes from different areas would visit, and they would hear the story of the white man who shot one of their young men, but stayed to make amends. Some were skeptical, others were moved. But all who met Thomas saw the same thing. A man who had been transformed by his own mistake, and by the mercy of people who had every reason to turn him away, but chose instead to let him prove his worth. In the end, Thomas's story became a testament to the possibility of reconciliation between peoples at war. A small beacon of hope showing that even the deepest divides could be bridged by genuine remorse, hard work, and the willingness to truly see others as human. It was a story both sides needed to hear, even if it couldn't erase the larger conflicts that continued to tear the territory apart. But in that one small Apache camp, at least there was proof that another way was possible, and Thomas McCarthy, the herdsman who had accidentally shot a young Apache, lived out his days as living evidence that we are defined not by our worst moments, but by what we choose to do after them.